Please, don't do that." The virgin giant bride's voice trembled in the candlelit barn as the rancher reached for her, but Jedediah McCain didn't stop. What he did next to Beatrice, the 6'4" mail-order bride who towered over his 5'6" frame, shocked every soul in Copper Ridge the very next morning. She had begged him not to come closer, not to see the truth of who she really was, not to touch the woman every man had rejected. But the rancher did it anyway. He did something so tender, so unexpected, that this virgin giant who'd spent her whole life being mocked would weep in his arms. And when dawn broke, he would carry her into town and do something so bold, so defiant, that the whole town would stand frozen in the street, speechless. But why was she begging him to stop? What dark secret was this giant bride hiding that made her terrified of her own wedding night? And what did this small rancher do that no other man had dared, something that would either save them both or destroy everything they had left? 3 days earlier, the stagecoach rolled into Copper Ridge under a burning afternoon sun. Dust hung thick in the air. The wooden wheels creaked to a stop in front of the general store, and Jedediah McCain stood waiting, hat in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. He'd spent 3 months' savings on that mail-order bride fee. His uncle's will was clear as creek water: marry by his 30th birthday or lose the ranch. He had 4 days left. 4 days to save everything his family had built. The stagecoach door swung open, and Jedediah's world tilted sideways. She was a mountain. Beatrice Holloway stepped down from that coach and kept unfolding upward like she'd never stop. 6 feet 4 inches of raw-boned woman, shoulders broad as a plow horse, hands that could palm a watermelon whole. Her simple gray dress strained across a body built for hard labor, not Sunday socials. Around Jedediah, Copper Ridge's main street went dead silent. Shopkeepers froze mid-sweep. Women gasped behind their hands. And then the laughter started. Old Dutch Miller, leaning against the saloon post, spat his tobacco and howled loud enough to wake the dead. "That's your bride, McCain. Hell, she could use you as a toothpick." The laughter spread like wildfire through dry grass. Men doubled over. Women whispered behind gloved fingers, their eyes wide with shock and something meaner: satisfaction. Little McCain finally got what he deserved: a freak to match the runt. Beatrice's face flushed scarlet, but she held her chin high, those startling blue eyes meeting Jedediah's for just one heartbeat before dropping to the dust. Shame rolled off her like heat from a forge. Her massive hands twisted together, knuckles white. "Mr. McCain." Her voice was soft, musical even, threaded with a Carolina accent that didn't match her size. "I understand if you want to send me back. The agency said you asked for a strong woman, but I should have been honest about my height. I know I'm not what you expected. I know I'm too much." Jedediah stood there at 5'6", looking up at her, his throat tight. He'd heard laughter like this his whole life. Half-a-man McCain, runt, midget rancher. The words had carved trenches in his soul. He knew exactly what she was feeling right now: the burning shame, the wish to disappear, the certainty that you're fundamentally wrong just for existing. Behind them, Dutch Miller was holding court now, his voice booming. "Little McCain finally got himself a woman. She'll probably roll over and crush him on their wedding night, if he can even reach her to say, 'I do.'" The crowd roared. Beatrice flinched like she'd been struck. A tear escaped down her weathered cheek before she could stop it, and Jedediah watched her try so hard not to break, not to show weakness in front of these vultures circling for blood. Her jaw trembled, her breath came shallow and quick, and in that moment, Jedediah McCain made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward, closing the space between them. The top of his head barely reached her shoulder. He looked up, way up, and held out his hand, Welcome to Copper Ridge, Miss Holloway. I hope you're ready for hard work. The ranch is struggling, but it's honest land, and I'm an honest man." He paused, then added quietly, so only she could hear over the jeering crowd, "And I don't give a damn what size you are." Beatrice's eyes went wide. Her lips parted in shock. For 3 heartbeats, she just stared down at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. Then slowly, carefully, like she was handling something fragile, she placed her enormous hand in his. It swallowed his completely. Her palm was calloused and scarred, working hands that had known pain. The crowd exploded with fresh laughter, but Jedediah didn't let go. He held her gaze, squeezed her hand once, firm and sure, and led her toward his wagon. Neither of them saw the black carriage that rolled into town an hour later. Neither noticed the well-dressed man in the expensive suit who stepped out and asked the sheriff a very specific question. "I'm looking for an unusually tall woman. Goes by the name Beatrice Holloway. Have you seen her?" The McCain Ranch sat 3 miles outside Copper Ridge, a collection of weathered buildings that whispered of better days long gone. Beatrice stood in the yard taking it all in. The sagging barn with gaps in the roof, fences broken and leaning like drunken men, thin cattle dotting brown pastures that should have been green. The house itself looked tired, paint peeling, one shutter hanging crooked. This wasn't just a struggling ranch. This was a dying one. "It's not much," Jedediah said quietly, climbing down from the wagon. His voice carried shame he tried to hide. "My uncle drank most of the profit away before he passed. Left me the land, but not much else. The bank's been circling like buzzards, if I don't turn things around soon." He trailed off, but Beatrice heard what he didn't say. He'd lose everything. That's why he needed a wife so desperately. Not for love, for survival. "I'll take the barn," Beatrice said firmly, already moving toward it. "You keep the house." "You don't have to do that. The house is small, but there's a bed and I prefer the barn." Her voice went flat, closed off. "I'm used to it, and I take up less space out there." She wouldn't look at him. Couldn't. Because if she did, she might see the same look every other man had given her eventually. Disappointment, disgust, regret. Better to keep her distance now before it hurt worse later. Before Jedediah could argue, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. 5 riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, and Beatrice's stomach dropped. Dutch Miller sat tall on a massive black stallion, 4 of his ranch hands flanking him like an army. They were all grinning, and that grin promised nothing good. "Came to see the giant bride," Dutch called out, swinging down from his horse with the confidence of a man who'd never been told no in his life. "Wanted to make sure you survived the wagon ride, McCain. She didn't sit on you and break you in half, did she?" His men roared with laughter, slapping their knees. Dutch swaggered closer, boots kicking up dust, eyes locked on Beatrice like she was livestock at auction. "Damn, girl, you really are a freak of nature, aren't you? What did they feed you back east? Horse grain, bull's blood." "That's enough." Jedediah stepped between them, and it would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking, this tiny man trying to shield a giant. Dutch looked down at him and laughed so hard he had to brace his hands on his knees. "Oh, this is rich," the runt defending the freak. "Listen here, McCain. Everybody in the territory knows why you ordered a bride. Your uncle's will says you gotta marry by your 30th birthday or lose this sad excuse for a ranch. But hell, boy, you could have at least found yourself a normal woman. Now the whole county's gonna laugh at you worse than before. No one's gonna do business with the man who married a circus monster." The words hit Beatrice like physical blows. Monster. Freak. The same words that had followed her from Charleston to here. Across 1,000 miles and a lifetime of shame. Her hands started shaking. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth and never be seen again. But then Dutch stepped even closer, looking her up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl. Tell you what, though, McCain, if you get tired of this giant, if she's too much woman for you to handle, you send her my way. I bet I could break her in real good. Might be fun to wrestle with something that size, see if she's as strong as she looks. The threat in his voice was clear. So was the hunger. Beatrice had seen that look before, in Cornelius Ashford's eyes back in Charleston. The look that said she wasn't a person, just a thing to be owned, used, displayed. Her heart hammered, her breath came short, and then something inside her snapped. Her hand shot out faster than a rattlesnake strike and grabbed Dutch Miller's shirt collar, lifting him clean off his feet like he weighed nothing at all. The yard went dead silent. Dutch's eyes bulged. His boots dangled 6 inches off the ground, kicking uselessly. His face went purple as she held him there with one arm, steady as iron. Mr. Miller. Her voice was still soft, still musical, but now it carried something new, steel wrapped in velvet. You're on our property. You've insulted your host. You've disrespected a married woman. And you're boring me. She held him suspended there for 3 long seconds, while his men sat frozen on their horses, too shocked to move. Then she set him down, gentle as placing a teacup on a table. I suggest you leave. Now. Dutch stumbled backward, coughing, one hand at his throat. Fury and humiliation battled across his face like thunderclouds. He jabbed a thick finger at Jedediah, his voice raw and ragged. You'll regret that, McCain. Both of you, when you lose this ranch, and you will, because I'm gonna make damn sure every merchant, every banker, every rancher in this territory knows what you are. Don't come crying to me for work. Your name's gonna be mud. And her, he spat in Beatrice's direction. That thing you married? She just signed your death warrant. They rode out in tense silence, dust rising behind them like smoke signals declaring war. The moment they disappeared over the hill, Beatrice's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the fence post to steady herself, her whole body shaking now, her breath coming in gasps. What had she done? She'd just destroyed Jedediah's last chance at keeping his ranch. She'd made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. She'd ruined everything, just like she always did. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. I'm so sorry. I just made everything worse. They'll never do business with you now. The bank will hear about this. You'll lose the ranch because of me. I should have stayed quiet. I always mess everything up. God, I'm so stupid. I should have just... Beatrice. Jedediah's voice cut through her spiral, firm but gentle. She couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the anger and regret she knew would be there. But then she felt his hand on her arm, small, warm, steady. Look at me. Slowly she turned. And what she saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was something she'd never seen directed at her before. Admiration, pride, maybe even the beginning of something deeper. That, Jedediah said quietly, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, was the finest thing I've seen in 5 years. Beatrice stared at him, unable to process his words. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, dark and heavy with rain. And back in town, the well-dressed stranger in the expensive suit was asking the sheriff more questions, showing him a photograph, offering a very large reward for information about a runaway woman named Beatrice Holloway. The net was closing. Time was running out. But neither of them knew it yet. 3 days later, they stood before Reverend Walsh in his cramped study that smelled of old leather and pipe smoke. No guests, no celebration, no flowers or music or any of the things a wedding should have. Just a 5-minute ceremony that made Beatrice Holloway into Beatrice McCain, spoken so fast the Reverend barely looked up from his book. He couldn't stop staring at her when he did. this impossible woman who had to duck to fit under his doorframe. His wife brought out cookies on a chipped plate, her smile tight and pitying, and neither Jedediah nor Beatrice could swallow a single bite. The pity in their eyes was worse than the laughter had been. At least laughter was honest. By sunset, they were back at the ranch, under a sky bruised purple and orange. Beatrice went straight to the barn without a word. Her wedding dress, simple blue calico she'd sewn herself, swishing around her legs. Jedediah watched her go, then lit lanterns in the house, moving through rooms that suddenly felt emptier than ever. An hour passed, then 2. The night settled heavy and quiet, except for crickets singing and the occasional low of cattle. Finally, as full dark wrapped around the land like a blanket, Jedediah walked out to the barn. She sat in the hay, still wearing that blue dress, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up proper. In the golden candlelight she'd lit, with shadows playing across her face, she looked almost fragile despite her size, almost breakable. She was crying, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away, like she'd forgotten anyone might see. Like she'd forgotten she wasn't alone anymore. Beatrice. Jedediah's voice was soft as he stood in the barn doorway. It's our wedding night. You don't have to sleep out here. Yes, I do. Her voice cracked like thin ice. She still wouldn't look at him. Mr. McCain. Jed. Please call me Jed. Jed. She swallowed hard, her throat working. I need to tell you something. The truth. Before you come any closer. Before you expect me to be a proper wife. You deserve to know what you really married. He waited, not moving from the doorway, giving her space. The night wind stirred through the gaps in the barn walls, making the candle flames dance. My name is Beatrice Holloway, but I'm not from a farm family like I wrote to the agency. That was a lie. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. My father was a shipping merchant, had money, a big house on the water, servants, everything society said mattered. When I was 16, I was already 6 feet tall. At 18, even taller. My parents were ashamed of me. Kept me inside, away from visitors, like I was something shameful to hide in the attic. Her hands twisted in her lap, those enormous hands that could lift a grown man. Then Cornelius Ashford came to our house for a business dinner. Rich man, powerful, connected to everyone who mattered. He saw me serve the tea. My mother made me do it, even though I was too tall, too clumsy, too wrong for the task, and he became obsessed. Not with me as a person, with me as a thing, a curiosity, a spectacle. Beatrice's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He wanted to marry me, but not as a wife. He wanted to take me to circuses, to exhibitions, to display me like a carnival attraction. The Charleston Giant, he'd call me. Make people pay money to gawk and point and laugh. When I refused, when I said I'd rather die than be his show animal, he smiled. And then he told my father about the debts. Tears flowed faster now. Daddy had been gambling, had borrowed from the wrong people, owed more money than the business could ever make. Ashford had bought up every single debt. He owned my father, and he said that meant he owned me too. Told Daddy he'd forgive everything if I agreed to marry him. If I didn't, he'd take the business, the house, everything. My mother begged me to do it, said it was my duty, that a daughter who looked like me should be grateful any man wanted me at all, even for that. She finally looked up at Jedediah, and the pain in those blue eyes nearly broke him. So I ran, middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and the little money I'd saved. Lied to the mail-order bride agency about everything, my background, my family, why I was really doing this. Came here thinking I'd be safe, thinking maybe out west, where everything's rough and hard anyway, someone might see me as useful instead of freakish. Beatrice's voice turned bitter. But I was wrong, wasn't I? You've seen how this town looks at me, how Dutch Miller looks at me, like I'm livestock or a prize to be won. And Jed, I need you to understand something." Her breath hitched. "I've never been close to anyone, never let anyone see me vulnerable, never let anyone touch me with gentleness, because every man who's seen the real me, all of me, has either laughed, run away, or tried to use me for profit or sport. I don't know how to be a wife. I don't know how to let someone in. I'm terrified of it." She stood up then, her full height making the barn feel smaller. "So, when you come closer, when you expect me to be what a wife should be on her wedding night, I'm begging you, please don't do that. Please don't ask me to open my heart or my trust. Please don't make me vulnerable and then watch your face change when you realize how wrong and broken I really am. I can work your land. I can protect your property. I can earn my keep. But please don't ask for more than that. Please don't do what every other man has tried to do. Take pieces of me for yourself." The silence stretched out long and heavy. Jedediah stood there in the barn doorway, this small man in dusty clothes who'd gambled everything on a stranger. Then slowly, deliberately, he walked across the barn and knelt in the hay beside where she stood, a gesture that put his eyes almost level with hers for the first time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Beatrice McCain, look at me." She did, tears still streaming. "You're not wrong. You're not broken. You're not property to be owned or a spectacle to be displayed." He reached up, and cupped her face with both his hands, his palms rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "You're my wife, not because I own you, not because I need you to save my ranch, but because I choose you. And I'm going to hold you now, not to take anything from you, but to give you something maybe nobody's ever given you before. Jed, please." Her protest died as he stood on his toes and kissed her forehead, soft and reverent, like she was something precious instead of monstrous. "Let me know you," he whispered. "Let me see you, not because you owe me, but because you're brave enough to be seen." And something in Beatrice shattered. She collapsed into the hay, pulling him down with her, and suddenly she was sobbing, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded, years of pain pouring out. Jedediah wrapped his arms around her as much as he could, his small frame holding her enormous one, and he just let her cry. Didn't shush her, didn't tell her to be strong, just held her while she broke apart in the candlelight and hay. "I'm scared," she finally gasped. "I'm so scared of letting you close and having you leave. Everyone leaves. I'm not everyone." His voice was steady as stone. "I'm your husband. And I'm not going anywhere." She pulled back enough to look at him, really look at him, this man who'd defended her to the town, who'd smiled at her strength instead of fearing it, who'd just promised to stay when everyone else had run. And slowly, carefully, she leaned down and kissed him. Not the chaste kiss from their ceremony. A real kiss. Vulnerable and terrifying and full of hope she'd thought was dead. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jedediah smiled. "There you are." "Here I am," she whispered back. And for the first time in her life, being seen didn't feel like a curse. It felt like coming home. They lay there in the hay, wrapped around each other in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow did, talking through the night. She told him about Charleston, about her lonely childhood, about the dreams she'd had before the world taught her to stop dreaming. He told her about growing up small in a place that valued size, about watching his uncle drink away the family legacy, about the desperate gamble that had brought her here. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, in that barn lit by dying candles, something shifted. Something real took root. But outside, moving through the darkness toward the ranch, Cornelius Ashford rode with 6 hired men and a writ of ownership signed by Beatrice's father. He'd tracked her across half a continent, and he'd come to take back what he believed was his. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge with soft gold light that promised a fine day, the kind of morning that made you believe good things were still possible in the world. The town was just stirring to life, shopkeepers sweeping their stoops, the bakery sending out the smell of fresh bread that made mouths water, farmers bringing in produce for the Saturday market. It was peaceful, ordinary. And then Jedediah McCain rode down Main Street, and ordinary shattered like glass. Beatrice sat in front of him on his horse, not behind him where a proper wife should ride, hidden and ashamed, not walking shamefully beside like livestock. She sat cradled in his arms like something infinitely precious, her head resting against his shoulder, wearing his coat over her simple dress. Her eyes were red from crying through the night, but there was something different about her face now. A softness, a peace, a light that hadn't been there 3 days ago. She looked like a woman who'd finally stopped running from herself. The street went silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Dutch Miller stood outside the saloon with his morning whiskey, and the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the wooden planks. Mrs. Henderson from the general store actually dropped her broom, the clatter loud in the sudden quiet. Even Reverend Walsh stopped mid-stride, his Bible hanging forgotten at his side. Every eye in Copper Ridge fixed on them, the giant woman and the small man riding together like the world's opinion didn't matter at all. Jedediah rode straight to the center of town square and stopped. Then, in full view of everyone watching, he dismounted and reached up to help Beatrice down. She hesitated, whispering urgently, "Jed, what are you doing? They're all staring. Let's just go home." "Trust me," he said simply, and held out his hands. She slid down from the horse, and he took her hand, her enormous hand that swallowed his completely, and led her to stand right in the center of the square where everyone could see. The crowd was growing now, people coming out of shops and houses, drawn by the spectacle. Beatrice wanted to disappear, but Jedediah held her hand tighter. "Folks of Copper Ridge," Jedediah's voice rang out clear and strong, carrying across the square. "I want you to meet my wife, Beatrice McCain. Some of you have laughed at her. Some of you have called her names I won't repeat. Some of you have treated her like she's less than human, like she's something to be mocked and shamed." He paused, letting his words settle. "But here's what you don't know. This woman is stronger than any 10 of you combined. She's braver than anyone in this town, and she's mine. My wife, my partner, my choice." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few people had the grace to look ashamed. But Dutch Miller pushed forward, his face red with anger and something darker. "McCain, you're making a fool of yourself. That thing isn't... Careful." Jedediah's voice went cold as winter. "Very careful what you say next." Before Dutch could respond, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into town. 7 riders came fast, led by a man in an expensive suit, riding a horse that cost more than most people's houses. He was tall, silver-haired, handsome in a cruel sort of way, and he rode like he owned the world. The crowd parted as he approached the square, and Beatrice went rigid beside Jedediah. The color drained from her face. Her hand started trembling in his. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, it can't be. How did he—" "Beatrice." The man's voice boomed across the square, cultured and smooth as expensive whiskey. "There you are, my dear. You've led me on quite the chase." Cornelius Ashford dismounted with practiced grace, his 6 hired men forming a wall behind him. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to take you home." "She is home," Jedediah said, stepping in front of Beatrice, even though this man towered over him. "She's my wife, legally married. You have no claim here." Ashford laughed, pulling papers from his coat. Oh, but I do. You see, young man, Beatrice's father signed over guardianship to me before she ran away. She's a minor under Charleston law. Her father's word supersedes any hasty frontier wedding. And I have a writ here that says she belongs to me. He looked past Jedediah to Beatrice, and his smile turned predatory. Did you really think you could run forever, my dear? Did you think I wouldn't find you? You're too valuable to lose, too rare, too profitable. I'm not going with you, Beatrice said, but her voice shook. I'm married now. I have a husband. You can't I? Ashford gestured to his men. I have the law on my side. I have your father's signature, and I have 6 men who will put you in my carriage by force if necessary. So you have a choice, Beatrice. Come willingly and I'll leave your little husband alive. Fight me, and I'll make sure he suffers for harboring stolen property. The square had gone deadly quiet. The whole town watched, waiting to see what would happen. This was the moment that would define everything. Beatrice looked down at Jedediah, tears streaming down her face. She was shaking all over, terror and rage and despair warring in her eyes. She could fight. God knows she was strong enough to break Ashford in half, but his men had guns, and the law, and if she resisted, Jedediah would pay the price. Go to the carriage, Beatrice, Ashford said smoothly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Beatrice started to move, started to let go of Jedediah's hand, her heart breaking with every step. But Jedediah held on, wouldn't let her go. No, he said quietly. Ashford's smile faded. Excuse me? I said no. Jedediah turned to face him fully, this small man standing against a wall of wealth and power and violence. You're not taking her. I don't care about your papers or your father's signature or your Charleston laws. This is Wyoming territory. And here, a woman's marriage is binding. She's my wife. She chose me. And I'll die before I let you turn her into a carnival attraction. How noble, Ashford sneered. How utterly pointless. Men, take her. The 6 hired guns moved forward, hands on their weapons. The crowd gasped. Beatrice started to panic, knowing this would end in blood, knowing Jedediah would be killed for defending her. But then something unexpected happened. Dutch Miller stepped forward. Hold on now, Dutch said, and everyone turned to stare. Dutch Miller, who'd mocked them, who'd threatened them, who'd promised to destroy them. He planted himself between Ashford's men and the McCains, his massive frame blocking their path. I don't know how things work in Charleston, but out here, a man's marriage is sacred. You don't just come in and take another man's wife. That ain't right. Step aside, one of Ashford's men growled, reaching for his gun. I don't think I will, Dutch said calmly. And then, unbelievably, Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. Then the baker, then Reverend Walsh, then more people, one after another, forming a wall of bodies between Ashford and the McCains. The whole town, the same town that had laughed and mocked just days ago, now stood united. You want her? Dutch called out. You'll have to go through all of us. Ashford's face went purple with rage. This is absurd. I have the law. I have rights. She's my property. She's not property, Jedediah said, his voice carrying across the silent square. She's a person, a human being, and she has the right to choose her own life. You don't own her. Her father doesn't own her. Nobody owns her. She's free. The words hung in the air like a bell ringing. Beatrice stood there, surrounded by people who'd been strangers days ago, protected by a town that had rejected her, defended by a husband who barely reached her shoulder, but stood taller than any man she'd ever known. And something inside her that had been broken. Her entire life suddenly felt whole. You heard my husband, she said, her voice strong now, clear as crystal. I'm not going with you, Cornelius. Not today. Not ever. You can take your papers and your writs and your property claims back to Charleston. I'm free, and I'm staying exactly where I am." Ashford looked around at the wall of townspeople, at the determination on their faces, at his 6 men who suddenly looked a lot less confident facing down an entire angry town. He was smart enough to know when he'd lost. With a snarl of pure hatred, he mounted his horse. "This isn't over, Beatrice. Your father will hear about this. The courts will hear about this. You can't hide forever." "I'm not hiding," she said simply. "I'm home." Ashford rode out with his men, and the moment they disappeared over the hill, the square erupted. People cheered, women cried, men clapped Jedediah on the back so hard he nearly fell over. Dutch Miller actually hugged Beatrice, lifting her off the ground, or trying to. Anyway, muttering apologies for being such a damn fool. The town that had rejected them 3 days ago now celebrated them like heroes. But Jedediah just looked up at his wife, and she looked down at her husband, and the rest of the world faded away. He reached up, she leaned down, and they kissed right there in the center of town while everyone cheered. It wasn't a perfect kiss. The height difference made it awkward, and they almost bumped noses. But it was real. It was theirs. And it was full of a promise that no paper or law or cruel man could ever break. That night they stood together on their ranch under a sky full of stars. The barn still sagged. The fences still needed mending. The cattle were still too thin, and the land was still struggling. But none of that mattered as much as it had before. Because they had something more valuable than money or property or the approval of others. They had each other. They had chosen each other. And in a world that tried to tell them they were too different, too wrong, too impossible to work, they'd proven everyone wrong simply by refusing to give up. "Thank you," Beatrice whispered, her head on Jedediah's shoulder as they watched the stars. "For seeing me, for choosing me, for fighting for me." "Thank you," Jedediah whispered back, "for being brave enough to be seen, for staying, for giving us a chance." They stood there until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew deep. 2 people who'd been told their whole lives they were too much or too little, too big or too small, too different to ever belong anywhere. But they'd found each other. And they'd found home. Not in a place, but in the choice to stand together no matter what the world said. And that, they both knew, was worth more than all the gold in California and all the approval in the world combined. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be ashamed of who you are. Sometimes love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your scars and chooses to stay anyway. Sometimes home isn't a place at all. It's a person who makes you feel like you finally belong. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you were too much or not enough for the people around you? Have you ever had someone stand up for you when everyone else walked away? Have you ever been the person who stood up for someone else even when it cost you something? Share your story with us in the comments and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that being different isn't being wrong, hit that notification bell so you never miss another story that might change how you see yourself or the world. Because everyone deserves to feel like they belong, everyone deserves to be seen, and everyone deserves a love that chooses them exactly as they are.
Once again, Tales from the Wild West sends a huge thank you to all of you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep creating. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.